Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us here. This is the Centre for European Policy Analysis conversation hosted in conjunction with the Embassy of Poland to the United States. And we're talking today about the future of US EU tech security policy. The reason we're partnering with Poland is because Poland is currently president of the European Council. So we're delighted to be joined from Poland live, we hope, by Piotr Kobielski, who is and make sure I want to give you your full title, the Deputy Head and International Cooperation Chairman of the Polish Presidency Task Force at the Ministry of Digital Affairs of the Republic of Poland. We're also joined by our Senior Fellow here at CEPA, that is Fiona Alexander, who has many, many years' experience in government here in the United States, and is a strategist in residence at the School of International Service, distinguished fellow at the Internet Governance Lab at American University, as well as being a senior fellow at CEPA and working in our own consultancy. Full bios will be available on our site, don't worry. And we're also delighted to be joined by Steve Lang, and Steve is currently the coordinator for international communications and information policy at the US Department of State. I should refer to you as the Honourable Steve Lang, I'm quite sure. And we might start with you, bounce across the Atlantic a bit here in sequence, Steve, and talk about, when we're talking about technology and security, and we're talking about the US position, you've long operated a model here of secure by design, via trusted vendors, partners that you can work with. How can you expand, or how are you expanding those definitions maybe to work with partners like the EU and trusted allies elsewhere?
Well, thank you very much, Ronan, and thank you for the opportunity for joining this great panel. It's always great to be able to have this kind of engagement with stakeholders in industry, civil society, academia, the technical community. I actually feel like Fiona falls into every single one of those categories. So this is really a good panel. But I think this topic is extremely important. Technology is increasingly foundational to economic power, military strength, and geopolitical influence. And if we don't set the global standards for technology, others will. Particularly in cyberspace and digital policy, if you're not setting the conditions in your favor, they are being set for you. And we in the US State Department are committed to creating and enhancing international partnerships to demonstrate American leadership and leverage US companies to counter and defeat cyber threats, while advancing a vision for technology governance that embodies our shared democratic values. As Secretary Rubio has noted, all of the innovation that will advance the economies of this century will be based on telecommunications and digital technologies. Secure technology is the foundation of a prosperous economy, whether we're talking about 5G or 6G cellular services, satellite networks, undersea cables, data centers, or cloud services and cloud storage. And an ICT ecosystem that includes all these parts is most secure when it's built by trusted suppliers and when strong cyber security practices are used throughout. And we in the State Department, in our engagement with counterparts overseas and stakeholders around the world, continue to highlight the risks of untrusted technology and encourage governments to consider security and not just cost factors when setting regulations for ICT procurement, including data centers and cloud services. And we are very clear in our messages to other countries, to governments, and to operators and companies around the world that you should prioritize your own national security by putting in place policy and regulatory frameworks that fully exclude untrusted suppliers from the entire ICT ecosystem, including wireless networks, terrestrial and subsea cables, satellites, cloud services, and data centers, et cetera. And we make the point that there are clear and tangible benefits to using trusted ICT. Using trusted suppliers can help attract new businesses and provide a lower cost of ownership over the long term. by mitigating and avoiding key risks. We also believe strongly that use of trusted suppliers signals to citizens and to the business community a commitment to the essential building blocks of an innovation economy, including network security, the rule of law, protection of data privacy, protection of intellectual property, and free market competition. And tech security is increasingly important to the business community. Companies want assurances that their data and IP, really the lifeblood of their business, will be protected. And as such, economies that rely upon trusted companies to supply their critical ICT infrastructure offer a more compelling case for foreign direct investment. So that is in some what we're prioritizing in our partnership and our engagement with governments and stakeholders around the world.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think that tees you up, Piotr, maybe to talk about a couple of months left in the Polish presidency. Where your priorities lie in terms of these digital and tech policy agenda. Some eminently quotable there, Steve, lots of things we could pull from what you had to say. We're talking about clear and tangible benefits. We're talking across a range of different infrastructure, 5G, 6G, undersea cables, and so on. But what's come back on the agenda in the EU in a big way is sovereignty, digital sovereignty. We are talking here with the backdrop of a new trade conflict, and there is a danger, a likelihood, whatever way you want to put it, that tech policy will be dragged into that. How do you see that from your side? Where does the competitiveness, sovereignty, working with trusted partners, whether it be US or otherwise, fit in with the agenda in the EU and for Poland in particular?
Okay, so good morning, everybody. It is a tremendous pleasure to be in this panel, and let me extend the perspective of the Polish Ministry of Digital Affairs, but also in general. I will try to provide like a more general scope of the Polish presidency and the Polish administration as such. So when we were like planning the Polish presidency in 2024, we were obviously we set the public consultations. So we asked in general the public which priorities to choose for the Polish presidency. And remember, that was the very beginning of the institutional cycle in the European Union, when Poland was among those first to be as a presidency right after the elections to the European Parliament and right after the setting up the new European Commission. At that very moment, we assumed that we won't have too many legislative proposals in digital areas on the table. So it was up to the presidency to set the tone and to set the stage and agenda and somehow shape the future agenda of the digital affairs in the European Union. As you rightly mentioned, for the last couple of years, there is an ongoing debate within the European Union on the so-called digital sovereignty or digital well, there are like a couple of names and phrases which we use to describe the attitude or the steps which the European Union is willing to take in order not to cut itself from the external partners, but to work on its own abilities. Poland was traditionally in a group of those states who were willing to develop the internal market, including its digital angle. It means that we are much in favor of the openness towards our friends, like-minded partners, our allies from outside of the European Union or Europe as such. So usually each 6 months, we, for instance, meet within the so-called D9 plus group of states, mostly from the Scandinavia, but also Ireland, a couple of like Estonia, a couple of other member states of this specific group. Why am I mentioning this? Because in our position during the Polish presidency, but also in those traditional venues, and that is going to last right after the Polish presidency, we are willing and we are going to continue to build the bridges, regardless of supporting this digital sovereignty or digital autonomy, as we also call it. We are going still to work with the various partners from outside of the European Union in order to support, as we call it also, this democratic community in the world, the community of human rights, the same countries which share the very same values as we do in Poland, but in European Union at large. Having said that, we set the following priorities for the Polish presidency. The top one priority, number one priority, was the cybersecurity. Remember that we are in a very unique situation when we border with a country which waged open aggression and war against another European member states. We have a common border with the Russian Federation. We also have a common border with the Ukraine that is the victim of this aggression. We also have a common border with the Belarus, who is a very close allies of the Russia. Having said that, and having in mind the situation that this entire conflict also moved into the cybersecurity sphere, we decided to select the cybersecurity as our top priority. There are like a couple of venues and issues in the cybersecurity that needs to be clarified in the European Union, and the one that is very important for us is a common methodology for the large-scale incidents. We want to have a common methodology and way we respond to the very large incidents in the European Union. We are the EU 27, and we don't want to have 27 approaches, national approaches to such incidents. So that was our top priority. There were like other digital priorities like AI, but also digital regulations. And the last one was digital diplomacy. Digital diplomacy. We put an emphasis on digital diplomacy as we wish to collaborate and work together with the European Commission towards or vis-a-vis our digital partners in the world, including the US. As Radek Sikorski said, regardless the new administration in the White House, whether whether these are like the Democrats or the Republicans, the Polish stance would be very much the same. We are going to stay as a very close ally to the US, and we wish to work very closely on digital issues. One first obstacle we faced was, which is pretty obvious, the AI diffusion rule. But regardless of certain tensions and changes and shapes in the policy on both sides of the Atlantic, in European Union, but also in the US, we decided to keep the very same position, to work very closely with our US allies and other partners. The European Union has 4 digital partnerships with Canada, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan. So we decided to put an emphasis on this. And just to maybe to close my intervention, just in a couple of days in Szczecin, which is a city in northern western part of Poland, on May the 8th, we are going to hold a conference that is exactly dedicated to the digital diplomacy. We are going to hold a gathering of the EU 27 digital ambassadors. So from each capital city, there would be the so-called digital ambassador taking part in this gathering. And once again, we are going to discuss the issue of the digital partnerships. And as the presidency, we are going to push and elaborate and encourage our friends from the other EU member states. Let's keep those channels of communication open, because we are the one community, transatlantic community, within the NATO, within the European Union, committed to the democracy, committed to the rule of law, committed to the human rights. And we should stay together Otherwise, there are like much powerful forces out there, and if we are divided, and if we set some borders or discrepancies between both sides of the Atlantics, we are not going to keep the pace and stay in this race with those let's call it like evil forces out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Piotr. That's very comprehensive. I think there's a lot of common ground there, but between what you both said so far. I think we don't need to be told in CEPA about the virtues of Fiona Alexander. I'm going to come to you now, Fiona. We heard about clear and tangible benefits. We heard about partnerships that the EU has with others, and we heard about the US looking to work with like-minded allies. You have tremendous experience with international bodies, whether it be the UN or again, internet governance or other areas. What would you like to see, and what do you see as the approach likely to be taken in the US in particular to engagement with those bodies and with other partners? Like I said, I think there is scope for further cooperation, it seems.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Ronan, and thanks for the invitation to participate today and offer some perspectives. In terms of sort of cooperation on these issue sets across different parts of the multilateral ecosystem, I might sort of break it into two different buckets. I think in a specialized agency like the International Telecommunication Union, which has a long history of working on tech-specific issues, and also has a long history of allowing other stakeholders to participate, clearly not as an equal because they're not a government in terms of a member state, but there are structures in these other institutions, whether it's ITU or UNESCO or something, that allows other people to participate in the conversation, which took many years to develop. I think you're likely to see much more of an opportunity and ability to cooperate when the conversation is narrow, when it's focused, and when it's specific to the issue at hand. And I think what happens is that in the larger multilateral ecosystem, and here I'm thinking of the New York-based conversations and broader-based institutions, I think the conversation often strays from the issue at hand, and often other issues get added in. And this is what happens, I think, in a larger geopolitical debate, where when countries are together to talk about a certain issues, the conversation becomes almost like a Christmas tree, and other issue sets get added in. And I think what you're seeing, and it's not my job to speak for the current administration, I'll defer to Ambassador Lang to do that, that's his job. But it seems to me, just observing the cycle, I think when the conversation becomes broad and when it starts to pull in a lot of other issues that are not direct to the issue at hand, it's becoming harder and harder for the US to agree with people, because the current administration has very specific views on what it wants and what it doesn't want. So I think that could be a challenge we see going forward. So I think, there's great opportunity in sort of specialized agencies where there's a focused conversation and you can talk and work together. I think the conversation becomes harder in the larger system when new issues get added in. And I was pleased to see, or maybe pleased is the wrong word, but I was intrigued to see what happened a few weeks ago at the Commission on Science, Technology, and Development when the US proposed a streamlining of a conversation to make it more focused. I was always a big fan of that, and actually tried it many times when I was in the US government in my environment. And often people don't like that because people get attached to the words that are there, or just want to update them. And then the conversation become, instead of having a 2 or 3 page document, you end up with a 15-page document, and then the next cycle, an 18-page document. So I think this is a good opportunity for everyone to kind of have a level set and do some streamlining of the issues. And maybe then there's opportunity for more collaboration in what's happening in this space. But again, I'm a big fan of focusing in the conversation where you can have a place to have stakeholders be involved, and to have a conversation where the people that actually own and operate and run the networks are involved in the conversation, whether that's industry or technical experts. And some institutions in the multilateral system are better adept at doing that than others.
And given the maybe skeptical view about multilateral organizations in the US at the moment, do you see those playing a role here, or does that streamlined negotiation almost have to be face-to-face, peer-to-peer, whatever one-to-one? Can be multilateral, but it involves parties who are already in a gang together, if you understand me. I know there's ongoing negotiations around trade, and they're being broken into country by country. Is that a better way to get it done?
one way is better than the other, and they're not mutually exclusive. The way the multilateral system works is it's whoever gets the most people on their side wins the conversation. And so that requires you to build coalitions. It's very hard to go into a multilateral environment on your own. And win whatever the win may be for you. But the same is true in a bilateral negotiation. These are all gifts and takes, and these are all compromises. So having regional blocks, and for the U.S., the transatlantic relationship is important, but not any less important than the Americas regional relationship as well, right? The U.S. is part of lots of regions. And Europe has multiple complex separate regions other than the European Commission or the European Union. So the more you can build a bridge and the more you can have a broad set of coalition members, the more likely you are to have a good outcome in a multilateral setting, but that's more complicated and can take more time.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. You get more people on your side, then that's how you move things along. Piotr, I might come back to you. It's delighted to hear you mentioning the D9 Plus. It's an organization, if we can call it an organization, a grouping, which we've done quite a bit of work here at CEPA and continue to do so. And I know you mentioned specifically cybersecurity, not necessarily an area that D9 Plus spends a lot of time on, but how does that marry with the other item on the EU tech agenda, the competitiveness compass, delivering on the goals in the digital decade, delivering on the recommendations of the Draghi report, and how is that done in a sovereign way, or can it be done in a sovereign way? I challenge that assumption,
right.
And where partnerships will play a role there.
I believe there's no contradiction in cooperating with the outside partners, as I already underlined this. I mean, once again, if we keep it as a one community, there's no such contradiction as such. Specifically, during one of the previous meetings of the D9 Plus in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, we were highlighting a couple of angles in securing this technological security. One is, for instance, coming out of the European Investment Bank, when the European Investment Bank is reorienting the funds towards the cybersecurity and the security project as such. In Poland, we have our national perspective, national approach to those issues. How is that? How do we do it? We spend not 2 percentage points of our GDP for our security. We are spending almost 4.5 of the GDP percentage points for the security. Maybe in near future we are going to reach even 5 percentage points of our spending for the security. Me, by myself, I come from the Military University of Technology. I joined that college in 2014. Now you wouldn't even compare it to 2014 in terms of the new laboratories, in terms of developing new sets of technologies for the military. Because of the war in Ukraine in 2022, just weeks after the invasion, we adopted the new act dedicated to the military, to our armed forces. But there was one specific issue regulated in this act, and that was asserting our cyber command. It was in the past. But this command received a legal basis for developing the cybersecurity in Polish armed forces, but it was also vested with another task, which is a digital transformation of the Polish armed forces. So when you ask me what is the venue we are trying to look into or explore, these are the military, because of the funds in the military and because of the technology and the geeks, the students who then raise in the ranks of such institutions. They provide the new technologies into the system, and then even when they retire, even when they leave the armed forces, they join the market. So they are automatically the part of the ICT sector, of the specialists who are of the great value in general, not only in the military but also in this civil sector.
Thanks, Peter. I think you're talking there about building, I suppose, cyber literacy at a high level. I might come to you, Ambassador, to you, Steve, about something that has worked quite well in the cyber area in particular. We can't divorce security from tech. That's now acknowledged. And there are aspects of regulation that are troubling on both sides of the Atlantic. Certainly a higher volume of it coming from Brussels, but Piotr mentioned as well the AI diffusion rules, which the Poles in particular were not happy about, and I can understand that. But how is that dialogue progressing, and how important is the cooperation in staying ahead of competitors who we may not want to get ahead?
Thanks, Ronan. First of all, I just want to highlight that the United States appreciates Poland's attention to cybersecurity and cyber defense during its presidency of the EU Council, and also that we support the Warsaw Call's recognition that investing in Europe's digital resilience has to go hand in hand with establishing more effective coordination and incident response mechanisms. We also want to encourage Poland's interest in regulation simplification efforts. Vice President Vance, in particular, has been emphatic on the importance of reducing barriers to innovation across the tech sector, because innovation is the engine that drives the economy on both sides of the Atlantic. U.S. companies that are better enabled to innovate and create new and existing technologies and exciting technologies that provide secure, reliable, and trustworthy products can enable all of our economies to excel. And we believe that this is true across the spectrum of critical technologies, from cellular and satellite to cloud and computing. And in this sense, as Secretary Rubio has said several times, America First is not America alone, and we are going to continue to emphasize to partners that our growth and innovation can bring mutual prosperity and security through partnership and cooperation on these critical issues, including secure cloud. And our administration has remained concerned that certain European approaches to technology security, especially for cloud services, may harm our shared national and cybersecurity. The U.S. opposes any form of sovereignty requirements that are motivated by political factors or a protectionist interest that would any requirements that would restrict U.S. companies from cloud tenders anywhere in the world. U.S. cloud service providers provide best-in-class cybersecurity. Instead of barring these firms, we encourage countries to leverage the security these providers can offer to provide a more secure and stable cyberspace. We share the EU's concerns regarding governments that indiscriminately and arbitrarily access sensitive information and critical data. However, we reject any cybersecurity approach that treats cloud service providers operating in rights-based democracies the same as countries subject to authoritarian control and without safeguards for government collection and handling of sensitive information. So we want to build partnerships with like-minded partners around the world, and see that transatlantic partnership as critical to enhancing our shared cybersecurity and our economic prosperity.
Thank you very much. I think you took the talk about competitiveness in Europe, the talk about sovereignty, how the two of those overlap. Fiona, it's maybe a bold question, but knowing what you know, is there a path forward technically for the European Union or Europe in general that does not involve working with the large American tech firms? I know cloud is the thing that gets brought to bear, and maybe vice versa when it comes to building secure telecoms networks in the US. Suppliers from Europe play a very significant role there as well. But is there a path forward without that cooperation, Fiona?
So I think the short answer is no. I just don't see it happening, right? And the reality is that, the days of having government-owned telecom operators is long past. That's how we started years ago with the ITU, with the Telegraph Union, then a telecom union, and we had national champions, or in the US, a de facto government-sanctioned monopoly in the form of TNT. And the world has moved so far beyond that. So I don't really see how we go back to that in a meaningful way for a variety of reasons. Um, but at the end, one of the biggest reasons, though, is that all of these applications and services and things that we're talking about all rely on sort of or use at their core underlying, internet TCP/IP standards and infrastructure. And those are open, they're participatory, they're voluntary, they're bottom up. And I just don't see the world shifting away from an, IP-based infrastructure that all these other services are relying on. I mean, there's really no incentive to do that. There's no market to do that. And again, I just don't see us sort of retrograde going back to like a 1920s communications infrastructure with the world and the networks being so interconnected the way that they are. That doesn't mean that we don't have to have hard conversations. And that's the advantage of a transatlantic relationship and a long history of friendship, right? With friends, sometimes you can have hard conversations and be honest with each other, and maybe they're not always so pleasant. But you have to have those conversations and you have to be comfortable being truthful with each other to figure out how to find a path forward. And I think that's where the transatlantic relationship actually excels more than other relationships the US might have, is you have this long history of cooperation. You have a long history of shared values. I think the ordering of those values can be different, and that introduces conflict. In the US, free speech and First Amendment is like number one. And I think in Europe, for historical reasons, privacy is number one. And just that flip of ordering between one and two can cause conflict and has historically. But I do think that, again, the beauty of old friendships is that you can be honest with each other. And so I do think that there's paths and ways for people to talk and work together.
Thanks, Fiona. I think your point about ordering of priorities is well made. It's one I've robbed and reused for many other people. So thanks for that. Piotr, might come back to you on the remaining couple of months in the Polish presidency. I know you've mentioned you've got the digital minute or the digital ambassadors together next week on the Polish coast. Did that Gdansk? And I know you have another event in Gdansk in June. So what do you hope to achieve with those?
It's Szczecin. If you remember the speech of the Churchill in Fulton, he was mentioning from the Szczecin in the north to the Trieste in the south. We have this iron curtain, so there's like a close reference to this speech.
Well, we're trying to avoid a digital iron curtain here. Boom, boom. But yes, go on.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our events, I mean, couple of ideas we were like exploring for the very first time as the Minister of Digital Affairs. Not necessarily each member state of the European Union has a separate Ministry of Digital Affairs. We are very lucky. We have a separate one in our competence. We have a very broad scope of issues from the cybersecurity into the e-government, into the AI, and so on and so forth. Because of it, we had this free hand in exploring a couple of new venues during the Polish presidency. For instance, we joined the forces with the other institutions, and we set the AI House in Davos. So we were like exploring and sharing our ideas and our AI projects where to be in Davos in January. And on the other hand, we are going to wrap up the Polish presidency by the so-called Digital Summit in Gdańsk. This time in Gdańsk, once again, it is a northern part of Poland by the sea, a beautiful place consisting of actually three towns. We call it like a tree city. The main one is Gdańsk, with a very long history of international cooperation from the Middle Ages until just recently. And we are going to wrap up, and we are going to conclude on the initiatives, as you also mentioned, that were already announced by the European Commission. There were like a couple of those, especially on the AI continent, but also on the quantum technologies. European Union is very strong in the quantum technologies and the supercomputers. We have a couple of companies also of both Polish and other European member state origin, IQM, for instance, or ISI, the satellite company that is also providing the services to the Ukraine right now, was set up by the Polish engineers and is helping the Ukraine in this effort. And that is a satellite company, a very strong one at this very moment. But so in Gdańsk, during the digital summit, we are going to wrap up and conclude on those issues. The e-commerce is another venue we are going to explore in terms of our not only competitiveness, but in terms of our security, the security of each customer in the European Union. When we have the so-called low value packages being important into the European Union from certain other outside countries in the world, it's just like a tsunami wave that was being moved in the European Union, and because of this, the digital companies they face tremendous problems and the fierce competence towards those foreign companies. We also treat this as a technological and digital security. So there are like various ideas, various initiatives coming out of the European Commission. We as a presidency, we support this. We provide the space to discuss it and maybe to decide certain issues. And the main point of it would be the digital summit in Gdańsk at the very end of our presidency. That is the June 17th and 18th. June 17th and 18th. We are working on the streaming of this conference, maybe to give the possibility to our friends from abroad, from outside of the European Union. But we still want to have those experts, ministers for digital affairs, commissioners, right in Gdańsk, right in this place to discuss on spot those very important issues for us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Piotr. I think we sold the Baltic coast of Poland quite well there. So well done. And maybe there's chance for further engagement with some of the people on this call there. We'll talk about that again. But Steve, to come to you maybe for your concluding remarks, we've got the Poland presidency wrapping up in a couple of months. But the agenda probably isn't expected to dramatically change coming out of Europe. We've somehow made it this far without mentioning China specifically, but China is that looming threat that may gallop ahead in certain areas. That I think that's some of the reason for some of the AI diffusion rules and other things happening. How do you see, or is there any scope for progress in agreements, as maybe like Fiona suggests, on narrow areas? We've mentioned the cyber dialogue with the EU in the coming weeks and months, as you see it. Then what would you like to progress there, if possible?
Well, you covered a lot of territory in that question. First of all, I guess I'll note that I thought Fiona's comments on the same values in different ordering was very informative, and I think in terms of competition with China and its role in the tech competition, the global tech environment, I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that the differences in our values between the United States and the EU are not as great as the differences that we have, that we both have with the values of the Chinese Communist Party and its approach to tech governance. And I think that does mean that there is the opportunity for collaboration and cooperation and to find agreements, especially on more technical issues, as Fiona highlighted, because cyber and digital diplomacy are about shaping the future and the rules of the road before our adversaries do. And if we don't set the global standards, they will. And transatlantic cooperation supports countering our adversaries in cyberspace to limit their malicious activities in the ICT ecosystem. And the United States remains committed to working with like-minded partners to ensure that the digital tools remain a force for liberty and innovation, not oppression, and that information freedom prevails over information control and manipulation. But I think at the same time, it's important to remember that we do have differences, and the United States remains concerned about some European approaches to technology security and digital regulation. But again, as Fiona mentioned, this is why we need to have the tough conversations with our friends across the Atlantic.
Thank you very much. Fiona, is there anything specific that leaps out as you as a good starting point? You may not have one, but is there an area you'd like to see immediate cooperation? You mentioned TCP IP, and I know we've discussed before internet governance in general, internet freedom, which it goes beyond the US-EU relationship specifically, but is that perhaps an area to start?
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, it's always useful to look at what's on the global stage and the agenda for this year. And this year is a big conversation about the renewal of the Internet Governance Forum and the 20th anniversary of the World Summit on the Information Society. And I think in both of these issue sets, the US and Europe are very much aligned. Again, I think that there's some shifts in US positions on broader UN funding and potentially broader UN issues that can complicate that if the conversation doesn't stay a little bit more narrow. So, but I do think that, looking at what's on our agenda for this year, figuring out how to make sure that the processes that are ongoing, whether it's the WSIS Plus 20 review or the upcoming IGF or conversations around what seems to me to be efforts in New York to consolidate AI policymaking in a way that I'm not sure makes sense, but finding ways to work together on specific challenges that are in front of us this year, I think is a good place to start. In addition to the conversation that Ambassador Lang laid out about how do people and countries with shared values and shared histories figure out how to deal with the challenges of the approach that China and other authoritarian regimes take on these issues, which are definitely and markedly very different from the US and Europe. So continuing to work on those issue sets, I think, helps.
Well, thank you very much, Fiona. I think it's a nice way for us maybe to wrap up that we have more in common than we don't. I'm pretty sure I'm badly quoting President Clinton there, but he is also, of course, responsible for what is a seminal now moment in tech policy. He delivered a speech in the mid-90s on freedom of the internet. And it'd be difficult to argue that wasn't a good decision for the United States in particular, when you look at the competitiveness and the comparable productivity and everything that went with it since. But listen, thank you very much to all three of our contributors today. First of all, I'd like to thank, of course, the Embassy of the Republic of Poland to the United States for assistance and support in preparing and helping us get this conversation on EU-US tech security policy together. So thank you to you, Piotr, for that. Thank you, Ambassador Steve Lang, for contributing, and to our senior fellow, Fiona Alexander. This is going to be available on the CEPA website. We encourage everybody to look at our content. We mentioned the D9+. I heard digital resilience mentioned there with regards to security. We've got a great report coming out very soon on just that topic within NATO regarding the cloud, and we continue to publish many articles on other areas that we've discussed on the call today. So thank you very much to all of you for contributing, and we hope to talk to you soon.